Because it is June, and because we live in the beautiful place where we live, when at this time of the year the lupins are in full blossom, painting hillsides and fields with their inspiring spires of violet and indigo, I cannot hear Jesus' parable of the mustard seed and not compare the kingdom of God also to our more local wildflower, which, though not native, has become inseparably associated with this little corner of the kingdom of God. Heading over to the Lupin Festival yesterday, I found myself wondering if Jesus might ever say, "With what can we compare the kingdom of God? It is like a lupin meadow, which when sown upon the ground is not yet visible, yet when it is sown it grows up and becomes the most magnificent sight to behold, a thing of breathtaking beauty." I think he would. The metaphor faded somewhat, however, when I considered the fact that our beautiful lupins do not become the greatest of all shrubs, as the mustard seeds of Jesus' parable do, nor do they put forth large branches so that the birds of the air can make nests in their shade. Still, I couldn't help but picture heaven as a field blanketed in lovely lupins, and imagine that we, in fact, live in paradise, or at least are constantly blessed everywhere we look with a foretaste of that heavenly place. It turns out there are lupins that grow into shrubs. The blossom stalks we see all around town are but one of over 200 species growing mostly across North and South America, with a few species native to North Africa and the Mediterranean. Mostly annuals and perennials, but a few are, in fact, shrubs that grow up to 10 feet tall, surely sturdy enough and large enough to provide shade and shelter for a nest. Imagine nesting in a lupin blossom. Sounds pretty heavenly, doesn't it? There is even one species of lupin native to Oaxaca, Mexico, that is considered a tree, growing 25 feet tall or more. A tree that at some point was just a seed, small enough to hold in the palm of your hand. Jesus said the kingdom of God is as if someone would scatter seed on the ground and would sleep and rise night and day, and the seed would sprout and grow. He does not know how. He also said, "With what can we compare the kingdom of God? Or what parable will we use for it? It is like a mustard seed, which, when sown upon the ground, is the smallest of all the seeds on earth. Yet when it is sown, it grows up and becomes the greatest of all shrubs, and puts forth large branches so that the birds of the air can make nests in its shade." Are these not the most beautiful and encouraging images? The inevitability of God's kingdom flourishing, sowing with faith in the present so that hope will blossom in the future. Considering these parables of Jesus this week at the height of lupin season here in western Maine, I couldn't help but think too about Miss Rumphius of children's storybook fame. Written and illustrated by Barbara Cooney, the book tells the story of the fictional Miss Alice Rumphius, captivated by her artist grandfather's stories of travel and adventure. Young Alice says that she too, like him, will go to faraway places and then return to live beside the sea. Her grandfather tells Alice that that is all very well, but there is something else that she must do. You must do something to make the world more beautiful. Alice doesn't yet know what that might be. Meanwhile, she grows up and indeed travels and has adventures. And then one day she hurts her back getting off a camel and understands that she has entered a new season in her life, as we are wont to say in church circles. Miss Rumphius returns to Maine to live by the sea and hatches her plan to make the world more beautiful, planting lupin seeds everywhere she went. According to the New England Historical Society, the main character of Cooney's book was in fact inspired by the real-life lupin lady, Hilda Hamlin, who secretly planted lupin seeds in the early 1900s to beautify Maine's roadsides and meadows. Every August, she cut bundles of lupin stalks and shook out their seeds over an ever-widening area. Then she began putting seeds in her pocket when she walked to the post office and strewing them along the roadside. She did this in secret, rarely telling anyone, although some friends did know. She didn't drive, so when friends gave her a ride, they'd often catch her tossing lupin seeds out the window, sowing beauty by stealth. Well, it may seem that we've gone off on some fabulous tangent. This isn't unlike what Jesus is saying about the kingdom and our place in it. That like Hilda and Alice, we too can keep seeds of faith in our pockets and scatter them wherever we go each day, becoming agents of change, planting hope, sure in the knowledge that they will sprout and grow, even if we do not know how. Seed by seed, until we are surprised one day by blossoming fields all over town, and the realization that beauty, truth, and justice are not unrelated. Writing in the aftermath of the First World War, the Catholic theologian Jacques Maritain suggested that salvation would require a conversation between theology and aesthetics, where beauty is not at odds with truth, nor is it an accidental extra in the process of artistic labor. While his hope for transcendence arose from the ashes of armed conflict, ours arises from the ravages of a different conflagration, a world in which there is still injustice and oppression. Our lupin fields bloom, even as there are other parts of God's garden that seem yet to prosper. And we pause to remember the ongoing struggles of justice and freedom for all. Especially this week, as we will acknowledge Juneteenth, the annual celebration of emancipation from slavery in the United States, in the midst of the continuing need for the Black Lives Matter movement. And all this month, as we celebrate Pride, even as anti-LGBTQ plus legislation is making its way through state and federal courts. Juneteenth marks both a tremendous victory and also a tragic failure. In the autumn of 1862, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. However, that news seemed to travel slow, and it did not reach Texas, one of the most remote of the slave states, until June 19, 1865, almost 2.5 years later. Although Juneteenth represents freedom, it also represents how emancipation was remarkably delayed for people who were enslaved in the deepest reaches of the Confederate South, the day when enslaved people were truly freed. And not by Lincoln's proclamation as is customarily taught, but by federal enforcement years later. And as we know, the promise of freedom in land was eventually replaced by Jim Crow laws, then segregation laws, and the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, voter intimidation and suppression, and systemic racism that endures to this day. Yet, we also see what once enslaved persons could not have imagined, that the seeds of liberation sown by a few escaped slaves in fact took root and grew into the insurrections that would become an abolitionist movement, followed by the Emancipation Proclamation, and then the Reconstruction era, going on to form flower buds in the Harlem Renaissance, spreading further in the Civil Rights Movement, and even to the election of an African American president of the United States. The kingdom of God is as if someone would scatter seed on the ground and would sleep and rise night and day, and the seed would sprout and grow. He does not know how. The arc of the moral universe is long, the civil rights champion Martin Luther King Jr. once said, but it bends toward justice. So too can we wonder at how a riot outside of a gay bar in 1969, led by drag queens and people of color, led to the first gay pride parade that following year and sparked an LGBTQ plus liberation movement that continues to change the landscape ever since, including the 2015 Supreme Court decision granting marriage equality to all, and President Biden's signing of the Respect for Marriage Act at the end of 2022, protecting the federal right to same-gender marriage. The kingdom of God is like a mustard seed, which when sown upon the ground is the smallest of all the seeds on earth. Yet when it is sown, it grows up and becomes the greatest of all shrubs, and puts forth large branches so that the birds of the air can make nests in its shade. Not only do we have a responsibility to take care of the garden, just as our forebears sowed the seeds of faith that have become that garden of liberation, so too must we also plant the seeds that will ensure that garden continues to grow and expand. St. Paul, in his letter to the Corinthians, makes explicit that, contrary to some notions of faith, faith does not deny the reality of struggle and hardship. Rather, faith always points ahead to a place where seeds planted in the present blossom by grace in the future, where through Christ, who lived and died resisting oppression, the old regime will pass away and where everything will become new, reflecting the truth and the beauty and the justice of God's kingdom. In one of his novels, Dostoevsky famously wrote that beauty is what will save the world. But we would do well to ask just what sort of beauty and just how it will save. At first glance, the novelist's claim seems as outrageous as a great and sturdy shrub growing out of something as tiny and seemingly insignificant as a mustard seed. But in a letter to his niece, Sophia, the novelist graciously orients our gaze in a particular direction. There is, in this world, he wrote, only one figure of absolute beauty, and that is Christ. To say that Christ is absolute beauty is to give beauty a peculiarly novel form, a slender stalk of full flowering faith, blossoming not in field or meadow, but nailed to the hard wood of the cross, and gloriously resurrected from the earth. One that therefore embraces death as well as life, fear as well as joy, what we might call the ugly as well as what we might call the beautiful, as the theologian Karl Barth noted. Or to answer the question regarding what sort of beauty will save the world, it is the self-emptying work of the suffering servant on the hard wood of the cross, seen through the lens of resurrection. Beauty victorious. We've done nothing to create that beauty. It comes, freely given. It becomes, grows, expands, though we know not how. Yet it bids us to participate, to behold. A lupin meadow in full bloom, a mustard seed of faith, a place where every one of God's children can flourish. We are not meant to simply look for beauty and then to grasp onto it and hoard it for ourselves if found, but to participate in its flowering, to become beautiful in the same way that Christ is beautiful, emptying ourselves out for each other in goodness and justice, and thereby give back all the beauty we have already received to the one who embodied it on the cross, the one who transformed a crown of thorns into a garland of beauty. We would do well to remember that when Miss Rumphius first started planting lupin seeds along the wayside, most people called her that crazy old lady. Yet after those seeds sprouted and grew and blossomed, she became known primarily for giving that gift of beauty back to her neighbors. So too, as we keep seeds of truth and compassion in our pockets and sow them along our path, we can become mustard seeds ourselves, agents of change through the transformative power of beauty, truth, and justice.